Right, we're on Parshas Chukas, and it begins, V'yadaber Hashem Moshe v'Aaron lemor. God says to Moshe and Aaron, Zos Chukos HaTorah, these are the Chukos, and I'll explain that in a minute, of the Torah, Asher Tzivah Hashem, that God commanded lemor, the following, that you should say to the Jewish people. What is it? V'yichu alecha para aduma tamima. You should take for yourself a para, which is a cow, right, of a specific age, which is totally red, asher ein ba mum, that has no flaw. Right? And that flaw could be two hairs of a different color, it could have anything that could be a flaw. Asher lo ala leha lo, and it has not had a yoke upon it, that is, it has never worked. You've never worked the animal. Right? So there's a number of issues that come up right away. We have to understand what this red cow is, what it means, but also, if it's telling us the following, we understand there is such a thing called this red cow, and I'll explain what it's used for. But one of the rules that we learn is that this concept of this red cow, the laws behind it are non-understandable. In other words, there are certain parts of the Torah, this is the quintessential example, that you will not understand. Although the Torah is here for us to understand. We should understand it, right? We do not have a religion that's that's only esoteric, mumbo jumbo, that doesn't make sense to us, that you just do it because you're supposed to and it's based on belief. Really, you're supposed to understand it. But there are parts that you don't. The parts that you don't understand are called a chok, which means there are different types of laws. You have a mishpat is a law, and like a law that's like a civil law. But that's a law that any government would make, right? That you have to, that our government makes a law that you have to pay taxes in order to have streets made, to be able to have water, right? So the law is, that's a mishpat, it's a logical law, right? Another example is murder, right? It's logical not to murder, right? Why? Now, how we define murder might not be logical, but to say that you shouldn't kill anyone for no other reason other than you don't want people to kill you is logical, right? I won't steal from you because I don't want you to steal from me. Right? It's logic. So that's a mishpat. But there are also other types of laws. One of them is called a chok, which we don't really know why. Even if the Torah gives us explanations, I'll give you an example that doesn't exactly fit, but like tefillin. Why do men have to wear tefillin? What does it do? How does it make the world a better place? We don't really know. We know that in an esoteric level, a spiritual level, it does, but it's not logical. No government would make a law like that. Like, you're not going to go to Tibet and they're going to have a law that men have to wear these boxes on their forehead. Right? So that's a law that really doesn't seem to be logical. This one is the most perfect example of it, because even when I explained it to you, there are laws within it that don't make sense. And this is what it is. The purpose of the paraduma is that we have this concept which we referred to before called tuma and tahara. Tuma and tahara are spiritual ability and spiritual inability. That is, there are certain things that a person can do which prohibit you, after you do it, from participating in certain spiritual activities until you become cleansed of what you've done. It's not good or bad. Right? We a number of weeks ago, we talked about when a woman gives birth, she becomes tameh. She becomes spiritually unable to do something. It's not a punishment. It's not only with bad. It's a reality. Like you have blue eyes or green eyes. That's all. That's all it's saying. And if you want to become spiritually able, you have to do X, Y, and Z. One of the things that happens is that there's a great mitzvah to take care of a person who died. If someone died, right, and you would come across a dead body, it's a very big mitzvah to take care of that body, like to bury it, because it's a big embarrassment that that person should not be buried. It should be left like that. So it's a mitzvah to do that. So if it's such a big mitzvah to do it, at the same time it says you become tameh by doing it. By coming into contact with the dead, you become tameh, spiritually unable to do certain things. In order to become spiritually able, there are different levels, so there's different things, like using a mikvah, right, which is a body of water that we have, many synagogues have them, and you go into this water, sort of like going back into the amniotic fluid when you're born, you become spiritually able again. But when you come into contact with the dead, that's not powerful enough. There you need to have the ashes of this cow. This cow is slaughtered and it's burnt, and the ashes are sprinkled on the person, and they become spiritually able. Right now, you'd say, well, that's pretty hard to understand. Right? They actually, philosophically, we could understand it, and we're going to talk about that as we go through the hour. But there's one law that makes it totally not understandable, and the law is that the person who actually does this, like you have a Kohen, a priest, whose job is to kill the animal, right, and then burn it, and take the ashes and sprinkle it on people. That's his job. But in order for him to do his job, he has to be spiritually able himself. Right? He has to be at the level where he can do it. He cannot have come into contact with the dead. Right? All right? So therefore, in order to do it, he has to be spiritually able. And what is he doing? He's helping other people become spiritually able, because he's sprinkling them with the ashes. The end result is he can sprinkle the ashes on thousands of people, make them spiritually able, and when he finishes, he becomes spiritually unable. He loses his level that he's on, and it changes. So then he needs someone to sprinkle ashes on him. And this is where they say we don't understand this. He's doing a good deed, a positive thing, where he starts out spiritually able. Everybody he comes into contact with becomes able because of him, but he goes the opposite way. So all of the philosophers, King Solomon himself, who was the wisest man of history, says, I don't understand this. It doesn't seem to make sense. And that's why God gave it to us. There are certain things that God wants us to understand that we're not going to understand. There are certain things that his mind, his abilities are much greater than us. And while we want to know everything, we want to understand everything, we want everything to make sense, there are certain things that won't. Right? We see this all the time. Somebody, God forbid, loses a child. Why would God take a child away, a baby? Why would God go and give a woman a baby and then take the baby away? Don't give her the baby in the first place. Why do that? Right? So people say, I don't understand why God would do that. There are reasons, but this is a similar kind of thing. There are things we just don't know the answer for. We don't understand. And part of Jewish life is we have to accept the fact that there are some things we will not understand. 99% of life we will, but some of it we won't. And because 99% we do understand, we have to trust that the 1% we don't is also good. We just don't know. Right? Now that message is an important message. But this is why the paraduma is considered to be what we call a chok, a non-understandable law. The next problem with this sentence is, it says, this is the chukah, this is the non-understandable law, but it says, zos chukos haTorah. The Torah is the non-understandable law, and that's not what it tells us. It should say, zos chukos paraduma. This is the non-understandable law about the red cow. It doesn't say that. It says this is a non-understandable law of the Torah. And then it talks about the red cow. And this is telling us a message that while we understand most of Torah, we don't really understand everything about it. Torah comes from God. God's mind is way beyond our ability to understand. God's knowledge, his ability to understand things, his vision, his ability to see all of history and all of the future at the same time, right, is something that we can't comprehend. Well, our mind doesn't work. It's like if I say to you, I want you to count to infinity. Your brain will explode. Like you can't do it. You'll just keep thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking and counting higher, higher and higher and higher. You'll never get there. Of course, by definition. It's like it's too hard. It hurts to think that way. God can do it in a moment. Right? God's mind is different than our mind. We're human. We're finite. Our mind can only do so much. He wants us to do everything we can, but it's only so much. So it's telling you that even though you understand much of the Torah, and a lot of it makes sense, like don't kill, don't steal, don't rape, these are all things that make sense. Nevertheless, there is a level of it that you don't understand either. The Torah is so deep that on a simple level we understand it, but on a deeper level we don't necessarily understand it. So that's why the sentence says, these are the chukim, the non-understandable laws of the Torah, meaning that the Torah itself is that way. even though we understand it. Then it goes into telling us about the quintessential example, the perfect example of this, which is this red cow. Now, people ask, why the red cow? Like, in other words, we understand there's this concept called spiritual ability and inability. What does it really mean to us today? It means nothing to us today, because today it really applies only to going into the temple. And if you want to go into the temple in Jerusalem and partake of sacrifices, you have to be spiritually able. Today we don't have sacrifices, we don't have a temple. So it has no effect on us today. None at all. Every one of us are spiritually unable, because we have either come into contact with the dead, or we've come into contact with someone who has come into contact with the dead, which means the moment you're born, you're spiritually unable, because your mother came in contact with the dead, or she came into contact with someone who did, or when she was born, right, from her mother came into contact with it. Just go to a funeral, you come in contact with the dead. So you become spiritually unable. And again, I'm telling you, it's not a penalty, it's not bad, it's just a fact. A person who is like this cannot go into the temple and partake of sacrifices. So at times when you would want to, during the days of the temple, you would have to have this ashes of the paraduma sprinkled on you first, then you can do it. So that's the idea behind how it works. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just a fact in order to do this. So the first thing is they ask, why the paraduma? So before I get into it, I'll tell you that there's a medrash that tells us that there will only be 10 paradumas in the history of the world, these red cows. Now, if you Google this on YouTube now, and you go into YouTube and you put in red cow, you will find that right now in New Jersey somebody claims they have one, and they videoed it, and it is a red cow, and you will not see another one. Like, this is not normal. Cows are not red. This is a red cow. You look at this video and it's a red cow, and if it is perfect, it has no two hairs that are different colors, it's not been worked and so forth, then it very well could be the 10th of the 10 red cows of history, because we've already had 9. This would be the last one, which will come before the Messiah comes. I'm not telling you that the one in the video is correct. I have no idea, but it's pretty interesting to see, because it's very similar. If not, it could be correct. I just don't know. So, but why the paraduma? So it is a very interesting thing. When Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, it says that the snake came to them and said, don't you want to be like God, who knows good and evil, who knows right and wrong, who knows everything? And of course they wanted to. Right? God told them, you can do anything you want in the garden, but don't eat from this tree. Because if you eat from this tree, the tree of knowledge, good and bad, right, then that's not good for you. You can't do that. So God only gave them one rule. Don't do that, eat that tree. Everything else you can do. Just don't eat from that tree. The snake comes and tells them, you know why God doesn't want you to eat from that tree? Because you'll become like God. God knows everything. If you eat from that tree, you'll know everything. So human beings have a desire to know everything. I want to be powerful like God. So he convinced them to eat it. Because of it, it says that death entered the world. Until that point, Adam and Eve were supposed to live forever. They were never supposed to die. The concept of death was not created. Because they ate from that fruit, a number of things happened, but one of them was death entered the world. That human beings became finite. They only live so long, and then they die. Right? And so here we now see that the idea of death directly related to Adam and Eve's eating from the fruit. Right? They ate from the fruit because they wanted total knowledge, and they ended up with the concept of death coming into the world. So when that happens, the paraduma is a perfect example of how we understand it. We don't understand why the paraduma does this. Why? Because it's coming to fix the problem, which is there are certain things human beings will never understand. To think you can eat a fruit and you will be like God and you'll understand everything is foolish. You won't. The only thing that will happen is death will enter the world. When death enters the world, you need this red cow to atone and to be sprinkled on you so that you can now participate in things. Why the red cow? We don't know. We don't understand it. Why? Because we'll never understand everything. So you see the circle? Right? Why did they eat the fruit? Because they wanted to understand everything. What happened was they didn't understand everything. Death entered the world. Now that death enters the world, how do you fix it so that it doesn't affect you in a negative way? Is you use the ashes of the paraduma. Why the paraduma? We don't know. Well, what do you mean you don't know? You don't know because we don't know everything, which was exactly why death entered the world, because they wanted to know everything and they couldn't. So you see this, how the logic works in a circle? That's about the best we have to understanding it. But like I said, if you look, you'll actually see in this video what really appears to be a red cow. And it's quite interesting to see. And they've had all these rabbis go and look at it and try to decide if it's the right one or not. But it's pretty auspicious if it is. It means that we're right before the coming of the Messiah, because it's supposed to happen right before he comes. So then it tells us a bit more about it. It says that you should give it to Elazar the Kohen, and then it says he goes outside at the camp, he slaughters the animal, that he takes the blood and he does certain things with the blood, and then he burns the body, and the ashes are used to make people more spiritually able. That's really the whole section dealing with the paraduma. And as I said, the one who is pure, like if you look on the top here on 841, a pure man shall gather the ash of the cow and place it outside the camp. The man himself who does this has to be spiritually able, he has to be pure. Right? But then at the end of the process he becomes impure. And that's really where the issue comes. And who needs it? And verse 11 tells us, whoever touches the corpse of a human being shall be contaminated. That person needs the red cow. And that's basically the idea behind it. There's much more to it, but I'm not going to spend our whole time on it.
In that case, on the second line of the first one, there's a word there, it's a tivu or tiva. And the one has got a ayin underneath it. Do you want to look at
it? Says what?
The second line of the third word. It's a tzadik, a vav and a hay. But
commanded.
The vav has got a u underneath in the middle.
Yeah.
And in the bottom, it's got an asa.
Right. So that's pronounced tziva. Means command. Okay, then it tells us, the next section talks about different things that happen that would cause a person to become spiritually impure or spiritually unable from coming into contact with the dead. And then the topic changes. On 842 and 843 we have the beginning of the loss of what we say 2 out of 3 of the great shepherds of the Jewish people. The great shepherds of the Jewish people are referred to as the children of Amram and Yocheved, which was Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. They were brothers and sisters. Moshe, was the lawgiver, brought the Torah to us. Aaron was the high priest. Miriam, their sister, who was the leader, really the leader of the women, and a great prophet herself. So 2 out of 3 of them die in this parsha, because we're getting, at this point now, we're about to enter the land of Israel. The story is ending, right, where the Torah ends. So it says that, beginning in verse 1, the children of Israel and the whole assembly arrived at the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people settled in Kadesh. Miriam died there, and she was buried there. And now, then it says that there was no water for the assembly. So here's what happens. Miriam, they go to this place in the desert, and Miriam dies. And she's buried. Everybody knows where she died, and where she was buried, and suddenly there's no water. So the Talmud tells us that if you're in the desert, of course there's no water. They've been wandering around the desert at this point for 38 years. It's almost the end, right, of the story. Right? This whole story has been going on for all of these years. Suddenly now there's no water. You've been in a desert, for God's sake, for all these years. There must have been no water lots of times. The answer is no. There was a well that miraculously traveled throughout the desert with the Jewish people and made it possible for them to have water. We say that as they went through the desert, God provided clouds so that they weren't in the heat all the time, and He provided light for them. He had at night there was a column of fire that stood in front of the camp so that they had light, and during the daytime there was a column of smoke so that they could follow it to know where to go, so they'd be on the path. So one of the things that it had was this miraculous well. By virtue of the fact that the Torah tells us Miriam dies and there was no water, we learn from this that the reason that there was water in this well was because of Miriam. Miriam was such a righteous person and such a great leader of the Jewish people that because of her, God made the water follow them wherever they went. As soon as she died, then her merit is gone, and there's now no water. Now this is the famous story comes up where Moshe, right, hits the rock. He's supposed to talk to the rock, right, to get water. But until this point, you don't have to do it because they've got water. So it's not a coincidence, right? It's telling you because of who Miriam was. She was such an amazing person. Because of who she was, then God made sure that there was water for the Jewish people. When she died, there wasn't. What happens? So the line before it tells us Miriam died there and she was buried there. Later on, when we have Aaron dying, that comes up a little bit later in the Parsha, and later at the end of the Torah, Moshe dies. It says that when Aaron died, nobody knew where he was buried, because he was buried, only two people knew, Moshe and one of his sons, but the Jewish people didn't know where. But they all mourned him. They loved him. He was a very kind person. Aaron was known as a person who stopped people from fighting with each other. That was his what he was famous for. Because he was like that, people mourned his death. When Moshe died, it says the men mourned him, the women didn't. Because Moshe was not known as a very kind person. He wasn't a bad person, but he was the lawgiver. He was like the police. I mean, he was a strong person. His job was to teach you the law, how to live. He was the disciplinarian. Aaron was a very kind person. So in Moshe's case, when he died, it says nobody knows where Moshe is buried, and it says that the men mourned him because he didn't have the same affection from the people as Aaron did. When Miriam dies, it says she died there, so they know where she was buried, and she was buried there, right? But yet it doesn't say that anyone mourned her. Right? You don't see it. No one mourned her. And then it says there's no water. From here we learn an important thing. It said that up until this point, right, people had Miriam. She was there. She was an important person. When she died, she was an old woman. Right? She was at the end of her life. When an old person dies, people are not often as upset as they are when a young person dies. Because we understand, a person lives a life and they die. It happens. Right? Nobody wants it to happen, but it does. But the message the Torah is telling us is that that's not the way to act. That even though what happens is they got used to having such a special person like Miriam around, that when she died, they suddenly realized you don't know what you got till it's gone. They didn't realize who she was until she was no longer there. So God made it very profound by taking away the water at that point, so people would realize you only were able to have water throughout the whole desert because of her. Because of how righteous, how special she was. You'd never treated her well. How do we know you didn't treat her well? Because you didn't mourn her. Nobody, it doesn't say anywhere that they cried when she died, that she was mourned, that she was missed. It doesn't say it. It's just business as usual. An old lady dies. An old lady dies. Next, tell me what else is new. So that's not how you act. And just because she's old and she's been around all this time, and you've been used to having her here, doesn't mean you can take her for granted. You have to always remember the significance of a person. And children, they think their parents are here forever. They don't really take into regard their parents. As an adults, we think our parents will be here forever, and then one day we find out that they're not. They're here forever until they're not here, and then you realize, I should have visited them more. I should have spent more time with them. I should have really gotten to know them better, and we don't. Right? It doesn't happen. And this story is telling us, right in the Torah, how important that is, that we have to do that. And that's why God acted in that way. So it says then that there was no water, and they gathered against Moshe and Aaron. So the people come and they start complaining to Moshe and Aaron. We don't have any water. You bring us to the desert, we should die in the desert. The people quarreled with Moshe, and they said, if only we had perished as our brother perished before God. Why have you brought the congregation of God to the wilderness to die here? Right, us and our animals. Like, what did you do? You take us out of Egypt, so we should walk around the desert and die from thirst? That's what you want from us? The fact that they had water for 38 years, the Jews sort of forgot that part. Right? Why have you brought the congregation of Hashem to the wilderness to die here? And why did you bring us up from Egypt to this evil place? No seeds, no figs, no grapes, no pomegranates, not even water. Right? So Moshe is like shocked how they're acting. Right? It's better we should go back to Egypt. than be here. At least there we had water. Here we don't have any water. 38 years you had water. Suddenly you don't have water, and now you're coming and complaining. So Moshe and Aaron went from the presence to the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. And as they went to talk to God about this. And God spoke to Moshe, "Take the staff and gather together the assembly, you and Aaron your brother, and speak to the rock before their eyes that it shall give its water. You shall bring forth for them water from the rock and give drink to the assembly and their animals." So this is the second time that this happens. This happens right when they left Egypt. They didn't have water, and right at the beginning, and because the well, it hadn't happened yet. And there God tells Moshe, strike the rock, hit the rock, and water will come out, which, is not totally illogical. You could tell me that there are certain rocks that have water inside of them. They're hollow. And if you break the outside, the water comes out. Right? Science maybe there's such a thing. But to talk to a rock and make water come out, that's definitely a miracle, right? So God tells Moshe the first time, hit the rock. Second time he says, 38 years later, I want you to talk to the rock. And then it says that what happens is that Moshe gets angry. Moshe, he calls the Jewish people rebellers. You're rebelling against God. He gets angry, so he hits the rock out of anger. And it says that because of that, the water came, but Moshe is punished. And that's why it says that because Moshe did this, he's not allowed to enter the land of Israel. God tells him, you can bring the people to the land, you can see the land, but you can't go in. Your job is over because you got angry with the Jewish people and you did this. Now God gets angry with the Jewish people all the time. Like, what's such a big deal that Moshe would be like that? So it's a whole section to understand this as to what's really going on. And what's really happening is the following. When Moshe is told to speak to the rock, here the Jewish people have gone through 38 years of miracles. They lived in the desert. Their clothes didn't wear out. Their shoes didn't wear out. They didn't have to worry about food. It was provided for them. They didn't have to worry about water. It was provided for them. Everything's taken care of. Suddenly they're having a problem with water. What do? They immediately go back to being children again, like complaining. What's wrong with you? What's with God? There weren't enough graves in Egypt. He should take us out to the desert to die here. But that's like after all of the things God did for them, right? That's the first thing they say. So Moshe is frustrated, not for himself, for God. How can you do this? After all this time, you act this way. So Moshe gets upset with them, right? And he doesn't do what God tells him, which is to speak to the rock. The idea was that the people should have understood that that they're already mature. They've gone through 38 years of miracles. So now Moshe is going to show them another miracle and give them water. The miracle is talking to a rock. Like we have an expression. It's like talking to a rock. Like nothing happens when you talk to a rock. Right? He talks to a rock, water comes out. But Moshe didn't do that. That's why it was considered disgraceful, because he hit the rock. And there, rocks could have water in them. So he broke the outside of the rock. Water came out. So it wasn't as big a miracle. It wasn't as shocking a miracle as it would be to talk. Because they should have realized, the Jewish people should have realized that God has sustained us on miracles all these years. He's going to sustain us with one more miracle. By Moshe hitting the rock, he lowered the level of the miracle so that the people could substantiate what they're saying. We're going to die out here in the desert. So Moshe says, okay, I'll find you some water. Not God will miraculously give you water. I'll find you some water. By hitting the rock, that's the message he's sending. So that's why God took that so seriously, that Moshe is sending the wrong message by doing that.
Was it not a bit of a harsh punishment considering Moses had been so unbelievable?
It's an enormously harsh punishment, but we have a rule in Jewish life, which is the greater the person, the stricter they're judged. It says the greatest people are judged the width of a hair, while the people who are not righteous are given every opportunity to improve. It's because of who Moshe was, the level he was at. Remember, Moshe spoke to God face to face. No one in history has ever done this. Moshe was the greatest human who ever lived, and he messed up. So God wants us to understand, first thing, that everyone messes up. Everyone can make mistakes. That's the first. If you look in the history books of all of the ancient cultures, their leaders never made mistakes. They never lost a war. They're all everything they say, they're lying, but they won't admit that their emperor is God, Pharaoh was God, the head of Rome was God. Right? They can't make mistakes. The Pope, right? The Pope is the head of the church. He speaks for God. He can't make a mistake. He's 100% right, no matter what he says. That's their belief. We say our leaders can make mistakes. So we see Moshe making a mistake. It's a very important lesson for us. But at the same time, you need to know that the greater you are, the stricter God is with you. It's like this. You have two kids, right? And they're both your kids are living on the other side of Bathurst Street, and they want to go to the Promenade Mall. Right? They're both, let's say, 12 years old. And one of the kids is very, very responsible and careful, and the other one is like a little wild. So you say to them, all right, you know what? I'm going to teach you that if you want to go to the mall, you have to prove yourself. You are very responsible. And I know you're going to go to the corner, you're going to press the button, you're going to wait for the light, you'll cross with the light, you'll go across. Okay? I'll let you go. You, the other brother, I can't let you go. Why? Because I know you're going to get to the corner, you're going to get all excited, you're going to run across the street without looking, you get hit by a car. This is for your own good. I'm not being mean. Right? This is your own good. So right, they both are working on themselves, and you come to the conclusion that the one who is not responsible is now responsible. He's been really trying, and he's shown you that he will stop at the corner, and he will press the button, he'll wait for the light, he'll cross with the light, he'll look both ways, he'll do everything he's supposed to do. Right? So you say, you know what? You both can go now. Both of you. The one brother is responsible, the other one became responsible. And they go down to the street corner, and you notice, when you look out the window, they both go and run across the street without looking. Both of them. So what do you do? There's no question that the appropriate response is that the one who's a responsible kid, you have to punish him worse than the other one. The one who's responsible is breaking his own personality. His personality is, I'm careful. I'm not going to cross and go crazy across the street. And my parents trust me because of it. So with him, you have to say, you know, you're hurting yourself. It's even worse for you. You should know better. So you have to punish him stricter to make sure that he learns the lesson. While the other one, you know he's going to run across the street. Even though he's been working on it, you have to give in because he's trying. But if he slips, he slips because it's not his nature. So the one who's not his nature, you're not going to treat him as strongly as the other one, right? Moshe is like the other one. Moshe is the one who's totally responsible. He's on the highest spiritual level as possible. He's done everything he's supposed to do, but he's still human. So when he does something wrong, especially something through anger, God is going to judge him very harshly. And for Moshe to not be able to go into the land of Israel was very harsh. That's what because he wanted to do this, and it had an enormous effect on the Jewish people that he couldn't go. And to make it even worse, there's a point later on in the Torah where God tells Moshe, stand up on this mountain and look out. You know what you see? That's the land of Israel. He says, look at that. You're not going, but you can see it. Right? In other words, some people say that was a blessing, that he was being nice, that you can see, I'll let you see the land, physically see it. Others are saying, no, that's a punishment. You can see it, but you can't go there. And, you know, here's the cake, but you can't have any. Right? So we see that he's judged harshly. That's how things are. The greater you are, the greater the punishment is when you do something you shouldn't do. And that's what happens here. So now we've got that. We have the story with the water. Now, if we look on the bottom of 847, we're going to lose. Aaron is going to die now. Remember, even though there's a lot left in the Torah, as far as the story is concerned, we're almost at the end. They're almost at the land of Israel now. Right? They're getting very close. So it says, they journeyed from Kadesh, and the children of Israel arrived, the entire assembly, at Mount Hor. Hashem said to Moshe and Aaron at Mount Hor by the border of the land of Edom, saying, Aaron shall be gathered to his people. That means he's going to die. For he shall not enter the land that I have given to the children of Israel, because you defied my word. So Aaron is not going to go into the land because of what Moshe did. His life is coming to an end. Take Aaron and Eleazar his son and bring them up to the mountain. Strip Aaron of his vestments and dress Eleazar in them. Aaron shall be gathered in and die there. So he does. Right? Moshe did as Hashem commanded, and they went up on the mountain before the eyes of everybody. Moshe stripped Aaron's garments from him, dressed Eleazar his son in them. Aaron died on the top of the mountain, and Moshe and Eleazar descended from the mountain. When the entire assembly saw that Aaron had perished, they wept for Aaron 30 days, the entire house of Israel. So here you see that they mourned for him, which you don't see by Miriam. So here it was, basically what happens is that Aaron is privileged to see his own son take over for him, right? Because Elazar is his son, and he's now going to be the high priest. Aaron was the high priest. Before Aaron dies, he sees that his son is being given his job, which is a good thing, the positive thing. A father sees, I've accomplished something, my son is taking over for me. He's moving on. Moshe doesn't have that privilege, by the way. His sons are really never heard of again. Nothing comes from them. But Aaron does. And then he dies there, and everyone mourns him. So why, as I said before, the reason everybody mourned Aaron was because he was so beloved. Let's get some examples of what that means. It says that, for instance, that when Aaron would see someone doing something they shouldn't do, acting incorrectly, he wouldn't go and reprimand the person, yell at them, how do you break Shabbos? How do you eat unkosher? How can you do this? He doesn't go and yell at them. I mean, he's the high priest, right? He was like the second most important person among the entire people, millions of people. And you can imagine that people would be embarrassed when they're doing something wrong and he sees them. He would go over to people and he would be very kind to them and friendly to them, and never say anything negative about what they were doing. It's to the point where the people would say, how can I do this? I'm going to hurt Aaron's feelings. Aaron's going to feel bad because I'm doing this. I can't do that. I just can't do it. And he was able to accomplish in getting people to improve without a threat. Moshe theoretically would go to them and say, the Torah says if you smoke on Shabbos, you're going to die. But Aaron wouldn't say that. Both of them are correct. It says that Moshe was the man of truth, right and wrong. Aaron was the man of peace. Those are two opposites. Peace and truth do not work together. Right? If you have truth is harsh. It's ugly. Right? You ever hear someone say something mean to someone, you say, I'm just saying the truth. Right? Sometimes you shouldn't say the truth. Saying the truth can be very, very, very painful. Sometimes you shouldn't do it. Sometimes you want to have peace. Peace is more important sometimes than truth. And Aaron was a man of peace. So Aaron would compromise. It says like if Aaron saw a fight between two people, he would go to them separately and he'd say, this guy, let's say Reuven that you're fighting with, Reuven, he's got a big ego. He can't come and apologize, but he knows that it's his fault that you're fighting. So do me a favor. Go over to him and apologize to him. And as soon as you do, he'll apologize to you. Right? But it's his flaw. He can't do it. But he really knows that he's wrong. Then he goes to the other guy and he says the exact same thing. He says, he's just got a big ego. He can't do it. So both guys go to talk to each other, thinking the other guy is clearly wrong. They both apologize, so they both hear that the other guy says he's wrong. And now there's peace. Now, is that true, what he did? No, it's not true. He's lying. It's not true. But he made peace between them. Did he hurt anybody? No one got hurt. Nothing bad. Right? That's how Aaron lived his life. Moshe would have said, you're not allowed to do that. This guy insulted that guy, you apologize. Right? So he would have stopped them from fighting, but they wouldn't have peace. You'd have one person humiliated and the other one goading. And I'm a big shot because he had to apologize to me. And so we always feel that peace is more important than truth. Not that you should lie. You're not allowed to lie about things for yourself, but you are allowed to lie for the sake of other people. Somebody asks you a question and the answer will humiliate them. It is better to lie if there's nothing lost than it is to humiliate them. There's always a famous joke. Right? Do I look fat in this? Right? My wife comes in and says, "Do I look fat in this?" You're going to lose no matter what you say. Right? It doesn't work. But you'd say if a person puts on, let's say I make it up. My wife would come back with a dress and she'd say, "Do you like this dress? I just bought it on sale." That means she can't return it. Right? And she likes it. And and it's okay. It's not embarrassing. It's green. I don't like green. So I'll say, yeah, I like it, even though I don't, because it's not embarrassing to her. It doesn't fit. It fits. It's just I prefer blue, but she likes green, so she bought green. If I would tell her the truth, it'll just sit in the closet. She can't bring it back, and she'll feel bad. So what do I gain by telling her the truth? Nothing. Nothing at all. So I'll lie. And I'll say to her, you know what, I really like it. So she feels good. She wears the dress. It's not embarrassing. There's nothing wrong with it. I just would prefer a different color. But why should I even tell her? That's in a case where peace is more important than truth. Now, if my wife says to me, go to the store and buy milk, and I go to the store and buy candy bars, and I come back and I realize, oh, she wanted me to buy milk, and I forgot to buy the milk. I only bought candy bars. I'll say, oh, there was no milk. I looked in 3 stores. There was no milk. Right? Now, that I'm not allowed to do, because there I'm lying to get myself off the hook. I'm not making peace with somebody. I'm being stupid. But if I'm making some people have peace, then I'm allowed to. You see, God does it. Abraham did it. Right? You have cases throughout the entire beginning of the Torah where this happens. And this was the life of Aaron. Aaron's entire life was that he went out of his way to make peace for people. So, of course, they mourned him when he died, right? Because he was such a special person that everyone loved him. No matter what you did, he always respected you. He always spoke nice to you. He always made you feel good. And because of it, you were a better person. He accomplished the same thing that he could by saying truth, except he did it in a way that you had your dignity. So people loved him. That's why they mourned him. And there's a very interesting thing that comes up next. If you look in the next piece, right here in section 21, it says, the Canaanite king of Arad, who dwelled in the south, heard that Israel had come by the route of the spies, and he warred against Israel and took a captive from it. Right? Israel made a vow to Hashem and said, if you'll deliver this people into my hand, I'll consecrate their cities. Hashem heard their voice. He delivered the Canaanites. Right? So what happens here? The Canaanite king of Arad, who dwelled in the south, heard that Israel had come by the route of the spies. So the Medrash asks, what did he hear? What did he literally hear? What did the Canaanite king hear? He heard that Aaron died, which was the line before, right? So he says as follows. If Aaron died, Aaron was the peacemaker. When there's unity among the Jewish people, they're very powerful. God is with them. They're united. They get along with each other. The Jewish people are very powerful. I can't go to war with them. I won't win. But he hears that Aaron died. Now the Jews are going to start fighting again. Now I'm going to go to war with them. And he does. He goes to war with them. Right? And now this, why do I say that's the case? Because if you think back, when we go back to the book of Bereshit, we have a story of Lot and Abraham. And it says that Lot and Abraham both became wealthy. Lot was a student of Abraham's, who was his nephew. They both had shepherds because they were so wealthy, had so much sheep, they had to have shepherds. And so it said the shepherds of Lot and the shepherds of Abraham started to argue with each other over certain things to do with land and with grazing and so forth. So Abraham tells Lot, we can't stay together. There's too much fighting. We can't stay together. You go in peace your way. I'll go in peace my way. Now, up until that point, Lot was a student of Abraham's. He would do anything for Abraham. He wanted to be just like him. He left home to be with Abraham. Now, suddenly he leaves. He goes to Sodom. That's where he goes to live. So Lot's changed. Something's happened. But it says, as soon as Abraham says that to Lot, we see we're fighting, you have to leave, the next line in the Torah says, and the Canaanites were in the land. And everyone says, well, what's that got to do with anything? Who cares who's in the land? The Canaanites, big deal. No, the same thing here, the Canaanite. The Canaanites are eternal enemies of the Jews. They were always fighting with the Jews. But they only show up when Jews are fighting with themselves. And you have now 2 instances. When Jews start fighting with each other, the Canaanites show up. Why? Because they know that God wants the Jews to get along with each other. And no matter what, if you don't get along with each other, then the protection that God gives us leaves. Now I can fight them. The Canaanites can now take over because we see the Jews aren't getting along. So that's exactly what happens here. When Aaron dies, things change. Because Aaron was such a special person. But we learn a very important point, that peace is more important than truth. It doesn't mean you can discount truth. Right? You can't lie all the time. Right? It has to be specific things. But peace is more important. To get along with people, to treat them with dignity, even if they don't deserve it, according to law. If you do it, then you're uniting. Yeah?
I just said you can lie for compassionate reasons.
That's right. Where you can't lie is for yourself. You can't.
It's for the good.
Right, but
It's okay.
like the example I gave, right? When somebody comes and they ask you, let's say if somebody comes in, how did I do? How did I do with this? Right. So if you can help them, right, to get better, so you can say, you know what, you did great. There's a couple of things I could help you with. Let me help you with these few things. Or I could say, oh, it's terrible. Let me show you what you can do. Right. The second way is true. It was terrible. The first way is peace. Which of those two people are you going to listen to? If I come to you and you're singing a song and you say, how was my song? I say, it's terrible. And I'll show you how to sing a song. You're not going to listen to me. No matter what I say, you're not going to listen. Because I've just knocked you down. You're just busy feeling bad now. But if I'd say, it was really good. Let me give you a few pointers to make it great. Then you're going to listen. But I'm lying. It wasn't good. It was poor. But my goal is to help you. So what do I do to help you? I'm allowed to bend to the truth to help you. You see it all the time. Yaakov's mother tells him, go to your father Isaac, tell him you're your brother. Tell him you're Esau. He's had it in the Torah. Yaakov goes and says, I'm Esau. Listen to this is a great one. God comes to Abraham. He sends 3 angels to Abraham. And he tells the angels are prophets. They're just saying the word of God. They say, this time next year, your wife Sarah will have a boy. Right? So that's Isaac, Yitzchak. So she says that Sarah is standing in the other room. Right? And she's hearing the conversation, and she laughs. And she says, my husband is 100 years old. How is he going to give me a boy? How's he going to give me a child? He's so old. He can't have children anymore. Right? That's what she says. Now, if God says that he'll have a child, it makes no difference how old you are. You'll have a child. God can do whatever he wants, right? So God goes to Abraham and says, listen, you have to have a talk to your wife. Your wife doesn't understand what I can do. You know what happened? When I sent the angel to you to say that this time next year your wife will have a boy, she said, I'm so old. How can I have a child? I'm too old. I'm 90 years old. I haven't menstruated in decades. How am I supposed to have a child? But that's not what she said. She said, my husband is too old. But God knows no man wants to think that his wife thinks he's an old man. Right? No man wants that. He's got dignity. He doesn't want to hear my wife thinks I'm old. So God said, what does it hurt to say that Sarah said, I'm old? Not that my husband's old. My goal of telling the story is that Abraham should explain to his wife that God can do anything he wants. If God wants to give you a child, he can give you a child without a husband. He can do anything he wants. But it had nothing to do with the fact of who was old. That's not important. What's important was God can do it. So God lied. He lied. It wasn't the truth. Sarah did not say it. Torah itself tells us what Sarah said, and God says what Sarah said, and they're two different things. Why? Because of peace. God wanted Abraham to educate Sarah about God, not to educate Sarah that he's not old, or that he should feel bad that his wife thinks he's an old man. That's not the important thing. This is the important point. That's why it's so significant that a person has that ability, and that's what Aaron stood for. Aaron was known as the man of compassion, the man of peace. And when he died, the Jewish people mourned enormously, the men and the women. They couldn't handle it. When Moshe dies, you'll see in about 10 weeks, it says that the men mourn, because the men understood the law. They studied the law. So they saw how great Moshe's mind was, how righteous he was. They saw the loss. The women said, oh, what do we got to do with him? It had nothing to do with Moshe. Moshe was was high up. He was up on the mountain. He didn't deal with our day-to-day stuff. Aaron dealt with us. And that's why you have that difference. That's why it's so significant. Right, now, we have here at the bottom another time that the Jews get angry. At the bottom of 849, and it says, they journeyed from Mount Hor by way of the Sea of Reeds to go around the land of Edom, and the spirit of the people grew short. The people spoke against God and Moshe. Why did you bring us up from Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there's no food and no water, and our soul is disgusted with this insubstantial food. So God sent fiery serpents against the people, and they bit the people, and a lot of them died. Right? So the first thing is, what is this our soul is disgusted with the insubstantial food. You know, you've heard of the manna, right? We've had it. It's been in a few parshas already. The Jews needed food in the desert, so God sent bread from heaven. They didn't have a bakery. They were going through the desert. So God sent bread every night. They would wake up in the morning. They'd find bread, like this special spiritual bread, on the ground near where they were. They'd go out, get the bread. They'd have food. They'd have enough for the day, whatever they needed. And the bread was amazing. This manna, it tasted like whatever you wanted it to taste like. So if you wanted the steak, it tasted like steak. You wanted cream cheese, it was cream cheese. You wanted cheesecake, it was cheesecake. You wanted the milkshake, it was a milkshake. Whatever you wanted is what it tasted like. Not only that, you had no problems with waste. There was no waste in this food. So all of the problems that we have with our stomachs and our intestines, no problems. They didn't have to use the washroom. There was no waste. All of the food got absorbed into their body because it was spiritual food. God sent this food down. It was bread from heaven, not bread from the earth. So now they're coming and saying, our soul is disgusted with this food. Like, imagine what kind of a horrible statement that is. This is food. That's amazing food. It's whatever you want it to taste like. It does, and it's nothing bad. They're basically saying that, you know what? We're upset. We don't want this food because we don't have to go to the washroom. That's the only thing missing. We don't have to go to the washroom after we eat this. In other words, they'll complain about anything. That's what they're doing. We want to complain. We'll complain about anything at all. We don't care what you say. We'll complain about the fact that we don't have to go to the washroom. Right? Not that we don't go to the washroom. We don't have to go. That's what we're going to complain about. That idea, right, that they say we're disgusted, shows you how sad the Jewish people were. That they're constantly complaining. Right? You know, we talk about how Jews like to complain today. This is where it comes from. The Torah is full of it. So God says, like, this is enough already. So he sends these serpents, right, snakes, out. Up until now, God guarded the Jews against all the animals of the desert. There are a lot of dangerous animals. Now he sends out serpents, and they start killing people. And so the people come to Moshe and they said, we've sinned, we spoke against God and against you, pray to God that he should get rid of the serpents. So God says to Moshe, this is how you get rid of the serpents. Make yourself a fiery serpent and put it on a pole. You've seen this. This is the sign of the Ontario Medical Association, a snake on a pole. Right? And it will be that anyone who was bitten will look at it and live. Moshe made a serpent of copper, placed it on a pole so that if the serpent bit a man, he would look at the copper serpent and he would live. Right? So, like, what is going on? Like, God doesn't say, okay, they're better. He says, all right, Moshe, you want them to get better? This snake is going to bite someone. When it bites someone, you're going to take a snake, make it out of copper, you're going to show it to them. They look at it, they'll get better. Right? But if they don't look at it, they don't get better. Like, what's going on here? It's pretty strange. The first thing is that it's telling you that the same thing that kills you causes you to live. It's all in your frame of mind. Right? The same people who complained and said, manna, that's terrible. It's disgusting. Well, it can't be disgusting because manna is whatever you want it to be. Whatever food you want, it's what it is. So how could it be disgusting? Right? But it's disgusting. So these people are like just looking for excuses to complain. So God's saying the same food that is terrible can be great. The same life that you think could be bad could be great. The same serpent that kills you brings you back to life. That's the symbol, what he's saying here. It's like a story of one of my teachers once told me. A woman one time wanted to buy a wig. You know, a lot of observant women wear wigs. She wanted to buy a new wig, you know, to look good. So she goes to the store. She brings her daughter with her, and she sees a certain wig she likes. So she tells the wig lady, you know, I'd like to see this one. She says, that's not for you. Let me show you one that really was good for you. She shows her this one. I don't like it. Shows her this one. I don't like it. I want to see this one. She keeps saying, no, that one's not for you. You know, and then the woman should know. It's her business. She knows what looks good on people. Finally, the woman says, look, I want to see this one. This is what I'm asking you for. She says, look, I'm trying to be nice to you. I know you don't have any money. Like, you know, you're not a wealthy person. This is a very expensive wig. So I'm just trying to push you towards wigs that I know you can afford. I'll make more money if I sell you this one, but I care about you. I'm not going to do it. So the woman says, I can't afford any of these. I have to buy one. So at least let me get the one that I want. So she buys the expensive one. And as they're leaving, the daughter looks at her mother and she says, "Mom, are we poor?" Why would she ask that question? She should know they're poor. I mean, if the mother didn't just say it, I mean, their whole life must be like this. They must not have any fancy stuff in the house. They must not take big trips. The difference is that the daughter didn't know they weren't poor because their life was happy. They had everything that they wanted, right? Everything was good for them. They didn't have all the money that they could use, but they had a happy life. They made a good life for themselves, so that the daughter didn't realize that they didn't have what her friends had. She had what they needed, and she had a happy life, and people were not unhappy that they didn't have money. They made do with what they had. Right? It was the frame of mind. Right? The family could have been sad and always looking at other people and saying, I should have what they have. Why does God do that to me? Why am I so poor? And then the kids will grow up knowing they're poor. These kids didn't know they were poor because their family were happy with what they had, and they lived a good life with what they had. And yeah, they could have used more, but they didn't have it. So they didn't even realize they were poor. It was all their frame of mind. That's what this is teaching you. That the difference between being happy and being sad is not what you got. It's your frame of mind. If you realize that whatever blessings you have in your life are blessings that God is giving to you, and whatever trials and tests that you have in your life are also special for you, you have to not forget how much good you have, even if you have problems. No one, I'm telling you, I've been a rabbi for 30 years. I've been counseling people for 30 years. Nobody's life is perfect. Nobody's life is easy. Nobody's marriage goes well. Nobody's children are perfect. Nobody makes all the money they should. Nobody has everything they want. Every single person has problems. And the difference in the cases are if you can be happy with what you have or not. That's why it says, who's rich? It says in the Ethics of Our Fathers, who is rich? The person who's happy with what they have. It doesn't mean the person doesn't try to get more, but whatever God gives me, I'm happy with it. It's the frame of mind that's important. That's what they're telling us here. It's really the significance is that frame of mind. And then the next section here, we're not going to have time really to go into, is the well. Remember I told you about this well. Right? Here we have what's called the Song of the Well. Right? The Jewish people, right, are now singing a spiritual song. In other words, they are moved to sing spiritually about the well that followed them through the desert all these years, which they lost when Miriam died. But they finally came to the conclusion that we didn't know what we had till it was gone. It took them all the way to here to realize that. When Miriam died, they didn't mourn her. And then God took away the well, they suddenly realized how good things were. Then they have a problem. God gives them this great food, and again they complain. They don't have what they want. Finally they come to the realization, they realize that what God gives us is good, what we have is great, that we should have appreciated Miriam when we had her, we should have appreciated the water when we had it. So they sing this spiritual song about the fact that they had this well. But you'll notice that there's 2 times the songs are sung in the Torah. One is called the Song of the Sea. When God splits the Red Sea and the Jews go through, they sing a song spiritually. They were moved to sing because God saved them. So it says Moshe and the Jewish people sang the song. Here it says the Jewish people sang the song. Moshe didn't sing it. And the reason is that Moshe always understood the worth of the life that we have. The Jewish people were the ones who didn't. But finally he was able to raise them up to the point where they finally could realize the good things they have in their lives, even if it doesn't mean that everything is good. But what I have that's good is really good. That's really the basis of it. And that's why it closes with that section. All right, there's a bit of a war at the end, but that pretty much ends it. Now, the next few weeks are really very, very, very exciting weeks. We get to meet some new characters. We have Balak, who is a non-Jewish prophet who comes to curse the Jews. We have the story of Pinchas, who stands up and has to kill one of the princes of the Jewish people, and how he's rewarded for that, and why it actually was a good thing, not a bad thing. So we'll have some exciting cases. But that takes us up to now.